It was one of those perfect Tuesday mornings where everything seemed calm and ordinary. The sun was shining through scattered clouds, and the quiet suburban streets were nearly empty, except for a few cars heading to work. Officer Jake Morrison sat in the passenger seat of the patrol car, sipping his third coffee of the morning while his partner, Officer Derek Chen, drove slowly through the neighborhood they'd been patrolling for the past 5 years. Jake was finishing up some paperwork from an earlier call when Derek suddenly straightened up in his seat. "Hey, check out that sedan," Derek said, nodding toward a sleek black car that had just turned onto Main Street. "Out-of-state plates, and she's moving pretty fast." Jake glanced up from his clipboard and watched the vehicle cruise past them. It was a nice car, probably expensive, with Illinois plates that stood out in their small town. "Yeah, let's pull her over," he said, setting his coffee in the cup holder. Derek flipped on the lights and sirens, and within seconds, the black sedan was pulling over to the side of the road. As they approached the vehicle on foot, Jake took in the details like he'd been trained to do. The car was spotless, clearly well-maintained. Through the back window, he could see several cardboard boxes stacked neatly in the back seat. The driver had already rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could clearly see them. Behind the wheel sat a black woman who looked to be in her early 40s. She was wearing an elegant navy blue suit that looked freshly pressed, and her natural hair was styled professionally. There was something about her presence that immediately struck Jake as different from most traffic stops. She wasn't nervous or fidgety. She wasn't making excuses before they even spoke. She just sat there calmly, looking straight ahead with a slight knowing smile on her face. "Good morning, officers," she said as Jake reached her window. Her voice was steady and clear, the kind of voice that commanded respect without being demanding. "Morning," Jake replied, automatically shifting into his professional mode. "License and registration, please. Do you know why I pulled you over?" The woman reached slowly toward her glove compartment, her movements deliberate and careful. "I assume you're going to tell me I was speeding," she said with that same calm tone, though I had my cruise control set to exactly 35. Derek, who had positioned himself near the back of the car, leaned forward slightly. Jake noticed his partner's hand had instinctively moved closer to his belt, a habit they'd both developed over years of traffic stops. It bothered Jake sometimes, this automatic tension, but he'd learned not to question it too much. The woman handed over her documents, and Jake studied them carefully. The license showed her name was Dr. Amara Williams, address in Chicago, Illinois. The car registration matched. Everything looked legitimate. But something about this whole situation felt off to him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. "Dr. Williams," Jake said, reading from the license. "That's quite a drive from Chicago. What brings you to our town?" She looked at him with those calm, intelligent eyes. "I'm starting a new job here. Just moved in yesterday, actually." She gestured toward the boxes in the back seat. "Still unpacking?" "Uh-huh," Derek chimed in from his position. "What kind of job?" Dr. Williams turned her head slightly to look at Derek. "The kind that starts on Monday," she replied simply, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Is there something wrong with my vehicle, officer?" Jake felt a flash of irritation at her response. Most people were nervous during traffic stops, apologetic, eager to explain themselves. This woman acted like she was doing them a favor by pulling over. "I'm going to run your license, Dr. Williams. Just sit tight." As he walked back to the patrol car, he could hear Derek continuing the conversation. Through the open windows, Derek's questions carried clearly. "So where exactly are you moving to? Is this car yours? Seems pretty expensive for someone who just moved to town." Jake settled into his seat and typed her information into the computer system. As he waited for the results, he listened to the exchange continuing outside. Dr. Williams was answering Derek's questions, but only barely. She had that way of being polite while making it clear she wasn't obligated to share her life story during a traffic stop. "Sir, I've already provided my license and registration." Her voice carried back to the patrol car. "Is there a specific reason you need to know where I'm living?" "Just making conversation," Derek replied, but his tone had an edge to it now. The computer finally showed the results. Clean record, not even a parking ticket. The car came back registered to her with no issues. Jake printed out a ticket anyway. She had been speeding after all. Maybe not by much, but the radar had clocked her at 15 over. When he returned to her window, Dr. Williams accepted the ticket without argument, though she did glance at the speed reading noted on it. 15 miles over the limit? She asked, her eyebrows raising slightly. I'm quite certain my cruise control was set to 35, which I understood to be the speed limit on this road. The radar doesn't lie, ma'am, Jake said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. If you want to contest it, you can appear in court on the date listed. I see, she said softly, folding the ticket and placing it in her purse. Is there anything else, officers? No, you're free to go, Jake said, stepping back from the vehicle. As they walked back toward their patrol car, Derek muttered under his breath. Did you catch that attitude? Questioning the radar, acting like she knows better than us. Jake nodded, though a small part of him felt uncomfortable about the whole interaction. He'd noticed the neighbor across the street had been filming the entire stop on their phone. That was happening more and more these days, and it always made him feel like he was being judged, like he couldn't just do his job without someone looking for a reason to complain. They watched as Dr. Williams pulled carefully back onto the road, her turn signal flashing, her speed exactly at the limit. She drove away without looking back, and within moments the black sedan had disappeared around the corner. Out-of-towners, Derek said, shaking his head as they climbed back into the patrol car. Come here thinking they can do whatever they want, drive however they want. That suit probably cost more than my monthly salary. Jake laughed, trying to shake off the lingering discomfort he felt. Probably some corporate type. Did you see all those boxes? Bet she's one of those consultants or something, coming here to tell everyone else how to do their jobs. They pulled away from the curb, resuming their patrol route. The radio crackled with routine calls, and they moved on to checking parking meters downtown. Within an hour, Jake had completely forgotten about the traffic stop. It was just another routine encounter and another ordinary day. Nothing worth remembering or thinking about twice. If he'd known who Dr. Amara Williams really was, and what her new job actually entailed, he might have paid more attention to how he'd conducted that traffic stop. He might have thought twice about the assumptions he'd made, the tone he'd used, the way he and Derek had approached a woman who'd done nothing wrong except perhaps drive a few miles over the speed limit in an unfamiliar town. But he didn't know. And that ignorance would come back to haunt him in less than 24 hours. The next morning started like any other Wednesday at the precinct. Officers filed into the building with their usual coffee cups and tired expressions, exchanging brief greetings as they checked their mailboxes and prepared for roll call. Jake arrived a few minutes early, still yawning from a restless night's sleep. He'd stayed up too late watching a game, and now he was paying for it. Derek was already at his desk scrolling through emails on his phone. Did you see the memo about the meeting today? He asked without looking up. Jake shrugged off his jacket and hung it on the back of his chair. Yeah, the big retirement thing for Chief Davidson. Probably going to be one of those long, boring speeches where everyone pretends to be sad he's leaving. Think they'll announce the new chief today? Derek asked, finally putting his phone down. Maybe, Jake replied, settling into his chair. I heard some rumors it's someone from outside the department. The mayor's been making a big deal about bringing in fresh perspectives or whatever. The truth was, most of the officers felt uneasy about Chief Davidson's retirement. Sure, the old chief had his problems, and there'd been some complaints from the community about how things were handled, but at least everyone knew where they stood with him. A new chief meant new rules, new expectations, and probably a lot of changes nobody wanted to deal with. By 10 o'clock, every officer in the department had crowded into the largest conference room. It was rare to have everyone together like this. Some officers were coming off night shifts, others had been called in early. The room buzzed with low conversations and the smell of cheap coffee from the break room. Jake and Derek found seats near the back, which suited them fine. They could see everything but wouldn't be expected to look too interested. Around them, other officers speculated about the new chief in hushed voices. I heard it's someone from New York, Officer Rodriguez whispered from the row in front of them. No way, another officer replied. My cousin works at City Hall, and she said it's definitely someone with experience in reform programs. You know, all that community policing stuff. Derek leaned over to Jake. Great, probably some pencil pusher who's never actually worked the streets. Gonna come in here and tell us how to do our jobs. Jake nodded in agreement, though he was only half listening. His mind kept drifting back to that traffic stop yesterday. Something about it still bothered him, though he couldn't figure out what. The woman had been polite enough. maybe too polite. Maybe that's what felt off. Chief Davidson entered the room with the mayor and everyone settled down. The chief looked tired, older than his 60 years. The past few months had been rough on him, with all the community meetings and newspaper articles questioning his leadership. Jake almost felt sorry for him. The mayor took the podium first, launching into a long speech about Chief Davidson's 30 years of service. He talked about the changing times, the need for evolution in law enforcement, and the importance of building trust with the community. Jake tried not to roll his eyes. Politicians always said the same things, used the same buzzwords. Then the mayor's tone shifted. And now I'm proud to introduce someone who embodies everything we hope to achieve in modern policing. Our new chief comes to us with an exceptional record of service, advanced education in criminal justice, and a proven track record of implementing successful community partnerships. The door at the side of the room opened, and Jake glanced over casually, expecting to see some stranger in uniform. His eyes focused on the figure walking through the door, and his entire body went rigid. It was her, the woman from yesterday's traffic stop, Dr. Amara Williams, but she wasn't wearing a business suit anymore. She was in full police dress uniform, the kind reserved for formal occasions. Her badges and insignia caught the light as she walked confidently to the front of the room. On her collar sat the unmistakable stars of a police chief. Jake's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was seeing. Next to him, Derek had gone completely pale. "Is that?" He started to whisper, but couldn't finish the sentence. The room erupted in polite applause, but Jake couldn't hear it over the rushing sound in his ears. This couldn't be happening. The woman they'd pulled over yesterday, the woman Derek had questioned like she was suspicious, the woman he'd given a ticket to while barely hiding his irritation, was now their boss, their chief. The person who would review their work, evaluate their performance, and ultimately decide their futures with the department. Chief Williams stepped up to the podium with the same calm confidence she'd shown during the traffic stop. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in every face, reading every expression. When her gaze passed over the back row where Jake and Derek sat frozen, there was the tiniest pause. Just a fraction of a second where her eyes met Jake's, and he saw a flicker of recognition. Then she moved on, as if she'd simply been counting heads. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying easily through the quiet room. "I know many of you are wondering who I am and what I plan to do here. Let me start by saying that I didn't come here to point fingers or place blame. I came here because I believe in the work you do, and I believe we can do it even better." Jake tried to focus on her words, but his mind was racing. Did she recognize them? Of course she did. How could she not? Was she going to call them out right here in front of everyone? Was this some kind of setup? "I've spent 15 years with the Chicago Police Department," Chief Williams continued. "I've worked patrol, detective division, and eventually administration. I've seen what works and what doesn't. I've seen officers do incredible things to protect their communities. And I've seen how one bad interaction can undo years of good work." Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone knew she was talking about the incidents that had led to Chief Davidson's retirement. "My philosophy is simple," she said. "We treat every person we encounter with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or what they look like. We de-escalate instead of escalate. We listen instead of assume. And we hold ourselves accountable to the highest standards because that's what this badge represents." Derek was gripping the edge of his chair so hard his knuckles had turned white. Jake felt sweat forming on the back of his neck despite the air conditioning. "I know change is difficult," Chief Williams went on, "but I'm not here to punish anyone for the past. I'm here to build a better future. I'll be spending the next few weeks getting to know each of you, understanding how you work and identifying where we can improve together." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'll be doing ride-alongs with different officers, reviewing body camera footage to understand our current practices, and meeting with community members to hear their concerns. This is a partnership and I want everyone's input." Jake's stomach dropped. Body camera footage, of course. Every traffic stop was recorded. Their encounter with her yesterday was sitting in the system right now, waiting to be reviewed, waiting for her to watch it and see exactly how they'd treated her. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but Jake didn't hear any of it. He was too busy trying to figure out what would happen next. Would she fire them? Suspend them? Make an example of them to show she was serious about change? When the meeting finally ended, officers began lining up to introduce themselves to the new chief. It was expected, the polite thing to do, but Jake wanted nothing more than to disappear through the back door and never come back. Should we just leave? Derek whispered urgently. We can't, Jake replied, his mouth dry. That would make it worse. She'd definitely remember us then. They watched as the line slowly moved forward. Officer after officer shook her hand, welcomed her to the department, made small talk. She was gracious with everyone, asking questions, laughing at jokes, seeming genuinely interested in getting to know her new team. Finally, it was their turn. Jake's legs felt like rubber as he stepped forward. Up close, Chief Williams was even more composed than he remembered. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect, her expression professionally friendly. Chief Williams, Jake managed to say, extending his hand. Officer Jake Morrison. Welcome to the department. Her handshake was firm. Thank you, Officer Morrison. I look forward to working with you. Derek introduced himself next, his voice barely steady. Officer Derek Chen, ma'am. Officer Chen, she acknowledged with a nod. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other in the coming weeks. That was it. No mention of yesterday. No accusation, no anger. Just professional courtesy, the same she'd shown everyone else. Somehow that made it so much worse. As they walked away, Jake felt like he'd just survived something, though he wasn't sure what. Behind them, Chief Williams continued greeting officers, her demeanor never changing. She didn't say anything, Derek muttered as they escaped into the hallway. Not yet, Jake replied grimly, but she will. It's just a matter of time. The rest of that day felt like torture. Jake went through the motions of his shift, responding to calls and filing reports, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. Every time his radio crackled, he half expected to hear Chief Williams's voice summoning him to her office. Every time someone walked past his desk, he looked up expecting the worst. Derek wasn't handling it any better. During their lunch break, they sat in the patrol car outside a sandwich shop, barely touching their food. Maybe she didn't recognize us, Derek said for the third time. Though his voice lacked any real conviction, Jake shook his head. She recognized us. You saw that look she gave us. She knows exactly who we are. So why didn't she say anything? I don't know, Jake admitted, staring at his untouched sandwich. Maybe she's waiting, building a case or something. Going through proper channels, Derek tossed his sandwich back in the bag, his appetite gone. We didn't do anything wrong, though. It was a legitimate traffic stop. She was speeding, was she? Jake asked quietly. The question had been nagging at him since yesterday. He'd trusted the radar reading without question. But what if it had been off? What if she really had been going exactly the speed limit like she'd said? The days that followed were somehow worse than that first day. Chief Williams began her ride-alongs, spending entire shifts with different officers. The department buzzed with talk about her. Some officers were impressed by her knowledge and experience. Others were wary of the changes she was already implementing. She knows her stuff, Officer Rodriguez reported after his ride-along. Asked really good questions, didn't just sit there judging. Actually seemed interested in understanding how things work here. But Jake and Derek noticed other things too. Chief Williams was reviewing body camera footage from various officers, studying their interactions during traffic stops and calls. She'd started weekly meetings about de-escalation techniques and implicit bias training. The words community trust and accountability came up constantly in her emails and announcements. Jake found himself watching body camera footage from his own recent stops, seeing his interactions through new eyes. Had he always sounded that impatient? Had he always made so many assumptions based on first impressions? The uncomfortable truth was that he had, and he'd never questioned it before. On Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Chief Williams' arrival, Jake was finishing up paperwork when his phone rang. The caller ID showed an internal extension he didn't recognize. His heart started pounding before he even answered. Officer Morrison, this is Chief Williams. Could you and Officer Chen come to my office in 30 minutes? Her tone was neutral, professional, impossible to read. Yes, ma'am, Jake managed to reply. He immediately called Derek, who'd just finished his shift and was heading to his car. She wants to see us, both of us. 30 minutes. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Okay, Derek finally said. Okay, this is it then. Those 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Jake tried to prepare himself for what was coming. Would they be suspended? Fired? Publicly reprimanded? He thought about his wife and kids, his mortgage, the car payment due next week. He thought about 15 years on the force, all coming down to one traffic stop he barely remembered until it was too late. When they arrived at Chief Williams's office, her assistant waved them in immediately. The office had changed since Chief Davidson's retirement. The old hunting photos and sports memorabilia were gone. In their place were framed certificates, a bookshelf filled with thick textbooks on criminal justice and community policing, and several photos of Chief Williams receiving awards and speaking at conferences. She sat behind her desk, and in front of her were 3 manila folders. Jake recognized the color coding. Personnel files. His stomach dropped. "Officers, please sit down," she said, gesturing to the 2 chairs across from her desk. They sat. The chairs suddenly felt uncomfortable, too small, like they were children called to the principal's office. Chief Williams folded her hands on her desk and looked at them both. "I think we need to talk about Tuesday of last week. The traffic stop, there it was." Jake felt his career flashing before his eyes. "Before we start," she continued, "I want you to know that this conversation is happening because I believe in addressing issues directly and honestly. I'm not interested in playing games or making anyone sweat unnecessarily." She opened one of the folders. Jake recognized the traffic citation he'd written her. Next to it were printouts from the body camera footage, frozen frames that showed different moments from the stop. "I've reviewed the footage from this stop several times," Chief Williams said calmly. "I've also read your report, Officer Morrison, and I've looked at your personnel files. Both of you have solid records. You're experienced officers who've served this community for years." Jake wanted to feel relieved, but her tone suggested there was a but coming. "However," she continued, and there it was, "this traffic stop demonstrates several concerning patterns that I'm seeing throughout the department. Patterns that we need to address." She pulled out a remote and turned on the monitor mounted on her wall. The body camera footage began playing. Jake watched himself approach her car, watched the entire interaction unfold. Seeing it now from this perspective made him cringe. Chief Williams paused the video at specific moments. "Here," she said, pointing to the screen. Officer Chen's hand moves toward his weapon. "Why?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Standard procedure, ma'am. Maintaining awareness during a traffic stop." "Was there anything about this situation that suggested a threat?" she asked. The driver had both hands visible on the wheel. She was calm and cooperative. Yet the body language here communicates distrust. She played more footage. "And here, Officer Chen asks where I'm living, whether the car is really mine. Suggests it's expensive for someone who just moved to town. Can you explain the relevance of those questions to a speeding violation?" Derek's face flushed. Watching it now, hearing his own words played back, the implications were impossible to ignore. Chief Williams moved to another section. "Officer Morrison, you told me the radar clocked me at 15 over. I've had our equipment technician review the radar unit you were using that day. It was due for calibration 2 weeks prior, but hadn't been serviced. The readings could have been off by as much as 10 miles per hour. Jake felt his face burning. "I didn't know that, ma'am." "I know you didn't," she said, and her voice softened slightly. "That's part of the problem. The department's been operating without proper oversight in several areas. Equipment maintenance, ongoing training, policy reviews. These things have been neglected, and officers like you end up in situations like this as a result." She turned off the monitor and looked at them both directly. "I want you to understand something. I'm not angry about this traffic stop. I've been a black woman in America for 42 years. I've been pulled over before, questioned before, treated with suspicion before. What happened last week wasn't personal, and I don't take it personally." Jake started to speak, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish," she said. "What I am concerned about is what this interaction represents. The assumptions made. The unnecessary escalation. The defensive attitude when I question the ticket. These are the kinds of things that erode community trust. These are the interactions that make people feel targeted and unsafe, even when they've done nothing wrong." She leaned back in her chair. "I pulled you both in here not to punish you, but because I see potential. You're experienced officers who know this community. You have the skills to be excellent at this job, but you need to understand how your actions affect the people you serve." Derek finally found his voice. "Chief Williams, I want to apologize." Watching that footage, hearing myself, I can see how it must have felt from your perspective. I never thought about it that way before. Jake nodded. I should have been more professional. Should have listened better. Should have checked the radar calibration. Apologies are a start, Chief Williams said. But what I really need is commitment to change. I'm implementing a new community policing training program. It covers de-escalation, implicit bias, cultural competency, and communication skills. I want you both in the first group going through this training. She opened another folder and pulled out 2 packets of information. This isn't punishment. This is an investment. I believe you can both become examples of what good policing looks like. But it requires you to be willing to examine your own biases, challenge your assumptions, and approach every interaction with fresh eyes. Jake took the packet she handed him. It was thick, full of reading materials, training schedules, and practical exercises. How long is the program? 8 weeks of intensive training, then ongoing professional development, she replied. You'll still work your regular shifts, but you'll also attend training sessions twice a week. It's a significant time commitment. And if we complete it? Derek asked. Chief Williams smiled for the first time since they'd entered her office. If you complete it and demonstrate real growth, you'll be certified as training officers for the program. You'll help other officers develop these skills. You'll be part of building something better here. She stood up, signaling the meeting was ending. Both officers got to their feet, still processing everything that had just happened. The first training session happened the following Tuesday evening. Jake arrived at the community center conference room feeling more nervous than he'd been in years. This wasn't like the standard department trainings he'd sat through before, the ones where everyone zoned out and counted the minutes until they could leave. This felt different, more personal, more important. Derek was already there, along with 6 other officers from the department. Jake recognized most of them, guys he'd worked with for years. They all wore the same uncertain expressions, sitting in a circle of chairs arranged around the room instead of the usual classroom rows. Chief Williams walked in carrying a laptop and a stack of folders. She'd changed out of her uniform into casual clothes, jeans, and a simple sweater, which somehow made the whole thing feel less formal and more real. Thank you all for being here, she started, setting her things down. I know some of you are wondering why you were selected for this first group. Let me be clear. You're not here because you're problem officers. You're here because I see leadership potential in each of you. She pulled up a chair and sat down with them, part of the circle instead of standing at the front like a lecturer. Over the next 8 weeks, we're going to have some uncomfortable conversations. We're going to watch footage that makes you cringe. We're going to talk about things you might not want to admit, even to yourself. But I promise you, if you commit to this process honestly, you'll come out better officers and better people. The first few sessions were harder than Jake expected. They watched body camera footage from departments across the country, incidents where routine stops turned deadly, situations that escalated when they didn't need to. But they also watched their own footage, their own stops and interactions. One evening, Chief Williams played a traffic stop Jake had conducted 6 months earlier. He'd pulled over a young guy in a beat-up car late at night. Watching it now, Jake could see how aggressive his tone had been from the first word, how he'd immediately assumed the worst. What do you notice about this interaction? Chief Williams asked the group. Jake forced himself to speak up. I came in hot. Treated him like a criminal before I even knew what was going on. Why? She asked simply. He thought about it, really thought about it. The car was old, falling apart. It was late. The neighborhood has had some drug problems. I just assumed. You assumed, Chief Williams repeated, letting the words hang there. And how did the driver respond to your approach? Jake watched the screen. The young man had been defensive, argumentative, making the whole situation harder than it needed to be. He got hostile. He mirrored your energy, Chief Williams explained. You came in expecting trouble, so that's what you got. Now watch this. She pulled up another stop, this time from an officer in another city. Similar situation, late night, old car, rough neighborhood. But the officer's approach was completely different. Calm, respectful, treating the driver like a person rather than a problem. The difference was stunning. The stop was over in 5 minutes. Everyone left safely, no escalation, no tension. Same scenario, different outcome, Chief Williams said. The only variable that changed was the officer's approach. Week after week, they dug deeper. They talked about implicit bias, the assumptions everyone carries whether they want to admit it or not. They practiced de-escalation techniques, learning how to calm situations down instead of ramping them up. They studied communication patterns, understanding how tone and body language could either build trust or destroy it. Jake found himself thinking about these lessons during his regular shifts. He started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way his hand moved toward his belt during certain stops but not others. The questions he asked some drivers that he'd never ask others. The assumptions he made based on nothing but appearances. One afternoon, he pulled over a car for a broken taillight. The driver was a young black man, probably early 20s, wearing a hoodie. 2 months ago, Jake would have approached this stop with his guard up, ready for problems. Instead, he found himself taking a breath, resetting his mindset. "Good afternoon, sir," he said, keeping his tone friendly. "I pulled you over because your left taillight is out. For safety, you'll want to get that fixed soon." The young man looked surprised by the approach. "Oh, I didn't even know it was out. Thanks for letting me know, officer." "No problem. Can I see your license and registration, please?" "Everything checked out fine." Jake could have written a fix-it ticket, added one more thing to this kid's plate. Instead, he handed everything back. "Just get it fixed within the next week or so, okay? Drive safe." The relief on the young man's face was obvious. "I will, officer." "Thank you. Really?" As Jake walked back to his patrol car, he realized something had shifted inside him. That interaction had taken less than 5 minutes, and nobody left it feeling worse. No tension, no hostility, no problems. Just two people having a reasonable conversation. It seemed so simple, and yet he'd been doing it wrong for years. Derek was going through a similar transformation. One day over coffee, he told Jake about a stop he'd made the previous week. "I pulled over this woman, expensive car, out of state plates. And for just a second, I felt myself starting to make all these assumptions about her. Then I remembered that training session about implicit bias, and I just stopped." "Started fresh. How'd it go?" Jake asked. "Great, actually," Derek said, shaking his head in amazement. She'd been speeding because her kid was sick and she was rushing to get medicine. I gave her a warning, pointed her to the nearest pharmacy. She thanked me. Can you imagine? She actually thanked me for pulling her over. The training wasn't just about traffic stops, though. They did ride-alongs with community members, seeing their own neighborhoods through different eyes. They attended community meetings, listening to concerns instead of defending themselves. They learned about the history of policing, the painful legacy that still shaped how many people viewed officers. One session brought in a panel of community members to talk about their experiences with police. An elderly black man spoke about being pulled over 17 times in 2 years, never getting a ticket, just being questioned about where he was going and what he was doing. A Latina mother talked about how her teenage son was afraid of police because of how he'd been treated. A young white woman shared how officers had been patient and kind with her during a mental health crisis, and how that kindness had saved her life. Jake listened to these stories feeling a mix of emotions. Shame for the times he'd been that officer who made someone feel afraid. Frustration that the job was harder than people realized. But also hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Chief Williams assigned them homework between sessions. They had to read articles, watch documentaries, write reflection papers about their own biases and blind spots. It was like being back in school, except the subject matter was themselves and the impact of their work on real people's lives. One assignment hit Jake particularly hard. They had to interview 3 people in the community, ask them about their perceptions of police, and really listen without defending or explaining. Jake talked to his barber, a black man who'd lived in the neighborhood for 30 years. The stories he shared, the casual indignities he'd experienced, the way he taught his sons to behave during traffic stops to stay safe. It opened Jake's eyes in ways he hadn't expected. "I never thought about it like that," Jake admitted during the next training session when they discussed their interviews. "I always figured if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. But that's not the reality for everyone." Chief Williams nodded. "Recognizing that is the first step. The next step is asking yourself what you can do differently." By the 6th week of training, something remarkable was happening. The 8 officers in that room had become a tight-knit group, bonded by these shared experiences and difficult conversations. They pushed each other to be better, called each other out when old habits crept back in, celebrated the small victories. Officer Rodriguez shared a video from his body camera, where he'd talked down a potentially violent situation using nothing but calm words and patience. The group applauded. Derek talked about how he'd apologized to a driver after realizing he'd made unfair assumptions. More applause. Jake found himself actually looking forward to the training sessions. They were challenging, sure, but they were also energizing. He was learning things that should have been taught years ago, developing skills that made him better at his job and better at connecting with people. One evening after a session, Chief Williams pulled Jake and Derek aside. "I want to show you both something," she said, pulling up a graph on her laptop. "This is citizen complaint data from the past 2 months. Complaints are down 18%. Response times are the same. Arrest rates are the same, but complaints are down. You know why?" They both shook their heads. "Because officers who went through the first 2 weeks of this training are already changing how they interact with people. Small changes, but they add up. You two are part of that." Jake felt something swell in his chest. Pride, maybe. Or purpose. "It's making a difference?" "It's making all the difference," Chief Williams confirmed. "And we're just getting started."